Hey guys, Pieguyrulz here, and welcome back to Spongey Bits. This time we're going to be ranting on an individual episode here, because, let's be honest, Season 4 had a lot of SpongeBob episodes, and at least half of them are really abominably bad. So I'll be making individual videos about some of the worst ones. Starting with chronologically the first, and also probably the worst, Good Neighbors. Squidward tries to have a relaxing Sunday. My favorite part about this episode is the opening shots of Squidward, SpongeBob, Patrick sleeping. It's really nicely edited and is a nice way to start off the episode. Unfortunately, everything else is downhill from there. This is a
SpongeBob episode
through and through. This is a Squidward torture episode done wrong. What does Squidward want to do in this episode? Just have a relaxing Sunday. And SpongeBob and Patrick ruin it beyond belief in ways that just aren't even funny. They're just so ignorant of the world around them and Squidward's emotions that it's not funny, and there's not even an excuse in this episode. I mean, yes, there's Naughty Nautical Neighbors, which starts off with Squidward being a jerk to SpongeBob and Patrick. Then there's Jellyfishing, which involves Squidward being bandaged up so SpongeBob and Patrick don't know that he hates what they're doing. In this episode, they just have no excuse. They're just idiots, and none of it is funny. And there's also a random giant robot at the end of this episode Squidward's house turns into. It's stupid, it's frustrating to watch, nothing is funny, and it just makes you feel so bad for Squidward. Also, this episode made me think about toenails in Squidward's house. Thankfully, though, this isn't that episode. But we'll get there. Oh man, we'll get there. It's ironic that an episode with good in the title would turn out to be so bad. So what I didn't initially mention is that this episode is really personally offensive to me. See, I'm an introvert, which means I like to spend some time alone without anyone else or outside distraction. I use downtime as a way to recharge my social batteries and get rested. Even if you're not an introvert, it's very important for you to take some you time and relax, not worry about other people for a little while. In this episode, more so than any episode that happened before it, you really get the feeling that SpongeBob and Patrick are terrible to live next to, and that you would be grumpy and terrible too if you had to deal with these people nonstop. It feels like they took the worst parts from all of the Annoy Squidward episodes in the first, second, and third seasons and mashed them up without any sort of realization of what made those work. For example, part of this rips off Squidward the Unfriendly Ghost when Squidward asks them to go do chores to get rid of them, and instead they do them in a way that annoys and bothers Squidward. This episode also gives off really conflicting vibes about how we're supposed to feel for Squidward. Now, of course, I'm sympathetic for him because his situation is terrible, and no matter how mean-spirited he is towards SpongeBob or Patrick, it's honestly deserving at this point. But half the time, Squidward's cackling like an evil villain, and the other half the time, he's acting really depressed and sympathetic. You have to pick one or the other. Either you make him mean and unlikable so that when he does have misfortune fall upon him, it's justified, or you make him sympathetic and don't torture him as much. Heck, even if they kept the same amount of torture in, but Squidward ended out on top in the end, like, I don't know, maybe SpongeBob and Patrick were hauled off for every Sunday and he still got to have his, then it would be warranted. Then this episode would make sense. And much like yet another Squidward episode I wasn't too fond of, I Was a Teenage Gary, this episode's plot is just all over the place. Like, the focus jumps back and forth from SpongeBob and Pat to Squidward, not really knowing who to focus on. Also, that robot thing comes out of nowhere, and really it doesn't serve much of a purpose other than to give Squidward one more middle finger at the end of the episode. I don't think the episode was meant to be taken this way, but the entire thing comes off as SpongeBob and Patrick playing a big game, and Squidward's just another plaything to them. His feelings are never taken into consideration. Even when he's yelling in their faces, they hardly understand what he's talking about. I mean, this episode justifies every time Squidward yells at SpongeBob for no reason. The reason is because most of the time, SpongeBob can't get anything through his head. Patrick's an idiot, so fine, you can excuse that. But SpongeBob is your main character. You cannot make your main character so unlikable and ignorant. And trust me, it takes a lot to make such a lovable main character like SpongeBob just so despicable and just alien. So I think I've proven that this episode fails in the story department, and as far as the comedy goes, there just is none. I don't see any sort of attempts at jokes in this episode. In a better Squidward torture episode like Skill Crane, the torture actually comes from the plot, like he can't pick up stuff at home because his hand is acting like a crane. It makes sense. This episode will just take any excuse, no matter how far-fetched, to cause Squidward emotional or physical pain. The episode doesn't even stand out that much when you think about it. Aside from that giant robot that, again, comes out of nowhere and has very little to do with the actual plot of the story, it just doesn't have an identity outside of an Annoy Squidward episode. I mean, I guess the identity they were going for is that SpongeBob and Patrick were in this good neighbor lodge, but really all that amounts to is them wearing the fezzes. Nothing else is really memorable about that part of the plot. There's the one where they think he's a ghost. There's the one where SpongeBob annoys him with a piece of paper. There's the one where Squidward gets payback by making SpongeBob and Patrick think they hate each other. Those are things that you remember about those specific Annoy Squidward episodes. This one, you just remember the fact that it's really, really mean-spirited and stupid. At least the other plots about annoying Squidward had an identity, had something to latch onto. This just has nothing. Even if it were funny, it would still just be mediocre and forgettable. A lot of bad SpongeBob episodes do something gross or something violent or promote bad morals, and aside from promoting the moral that you should really annoy your neighbor and invade his home, this episode really doesn't do any of that stuff. It's just bad in the traditional sense of not being funny and having punishment placed on the wrong character. It just simply doesn't understand the dichotomy of a SpongeBob episode or the dynamics between these characters. So it's just a bad experience all the way through, and definitely not an episode you ever want to watch again. And you know what's ironic? The back of the box calls the episode Good Neighbor. Yeah, it gets the name of the episode wrong, and its description makes it sound horrific, but the overall implication is that Squidward is indeed the good neighbor in this scenario. SpongeBob and Patrick are not. And in fact, on this cover of the DVD, yeah, this is the episode that gets featured. Wonderful. Pieguyrulz, out.